Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. End of part 1. When the earthquake hit, Ethan had acted without thinking. His mind raced, but his body moved on instinct. Finding Olivia amidst the chaos wasn't easy. The city had been thrown into disarray, buildings crumbled, roads split open, and dust filled the air. The world seemed to be breaking apart around him, but in that moment, Ethan's only focus was on Olivia. The last time he saw her, she had been in one of the apartments, alone, waiting for him to finish up a meeting. Now, everything had changed. When he finally found her, trapped under a pile of rubble, the fear in her eyes was undeniable. She was struggling to breathe, her clothes covered in dust, and her face pale with shock. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed to her side. He pulled her out of the debris, his heart pounding in his chest as he made sure she was all right. He could feel her shaking in his arms, and despite everything that had just happened, he realized something: he cared for her more than he ever thought possible. This was not just a business arrangement anymore. This was real. Ethan had never allowed himself to feel vulnerable before, but seeing Olivia in danger was a reminder of how fragile life really was. He helped her to her feet, and together, they made their way out of the crumbling building. The streets outside were no better, people running, crying, and trying to get to safety. But Ethan was focused only on Olivia. He held her close, ensuring she didn't get lost in the madness. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but there was something else too, a strange sense of clarity, like the chaos around them was somehow pushing them closer together. After they reached safety, Ethan looked at Olivia in a way he never had before. The fake marriage, the contract, all of it suddenly felt insignificant compared to the depth of what he was experiencing. Olivia, on the other hand, was trying to process everything. She had always kept her emotions in check. She was used to being independent, not relying on anyone, especially not a man like Ethan. But in that moment, when he risked everything to save her, her walls started to crumble. She had always respected him, admired his strength and determination, but now she saw a different side of him. There was vulnerability in his eyes, a side he had never shown before. Over the next few days, the city began to recover from the shock of the earthquake. But for Ethan and Olivia, things had changed in ways they hadn't expected. They found themselves spending more time together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They started talking about things they had never discussed before. Their pasts, their fears, their dreams. They learned that despite their different worlds, they shared more in common than they had initially thought. Olivia was starting to see Ethan as more than just the CEO, more than just the man who had hired her for a fake marriage. He was someone she could trust, someone who, despite his wealth, had the courage to act when it mattered most. But even as they grew closer, there was still the lingering question: could a marriage built on a contract really become real? Ethan struggled with his feelings. He had spent so many years focused on his career, building his empire, and hiding behind his success. He had never allowed anyone to get close. But Olivia had broken through his walls in ways he didn't expect. He found himself thinking about her when he shouldn't, imagining a future with her beyond the contract. He couldn't deny the pull he felt when she was near, the way his heart raced whenever she smiled at him. But he didn't want to risk their bond, not when it was already fragile enough. He wasn't sure if this was love or just a reaction to the intensity of the situation. The earthquake had shaken the city, but had it shaken his heart too? For Olivia, the situation was just as complicated. She had made a deal with herself when she first agreed to the contract: keep it professional, don't get emotionally involved. But now, she found herself questioning her own rules. She had told herself that she would walk away from this when the year was up, take the money, and go on with her life. But Ethan's kindness, his bravery, and the way he had been there for her during the crisis made it hard to ignore the growing feelings inside her. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew one thing: this fake marriage was no longer something she could easily walk away from. It had become something more, something real, and that scared her. As they both tried to make sense of their feelings, the world around them was slowly returning to normal. But for Ethan and Olivia, the real question remained: could they truly turn this fake marriage into something real, or were they just two people caught in the aftermath of a disaster, looking for comfort in each other's arms? Only time would tell. As the days went by, the city slowly began to recover from the earthquake, but for Ethan and Olivia, everything had changed. The bond they had formed during the crisis couldn't be ignored. They found themselves spending more time together, not out of necessity, but because they actually wanted to. What started as a simple arrangement, a business deal, had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Ethan, the stoic billionaire who had always kept his emotions locked away, began to open up. He found himself thinking about Olivia when he wasn't with her, something he had never allowed himself to do. She had become a part of his life in ways that went far beyond the contract they had signed. He couldn't stop wondering if this was more than just a reaction to the intensity of the situation. Was he truly falling for her, or was this just a temporary connection formed under extraordinary circumstances? Olivia, too, was wrestling with her own emotions. She had always been independent, self-sufficient, and wary of relying on anyone, especially a man like Ethan. The contract they had signed was clear: it was a business deal, nothing more. But the more time she spent with Ethan, the more she realized how much she had begun to care for him. It wasn't just his wealth or his status as a CEO that drew her in. It was his vulnerability, the way he had risked everything to save her when the earthquake hit, the way he had been there for her when the world felt like it was falling apart. He had shown her a side of himself that no one else had seen, and she couldn't ignore the way her feelings for him were deepening. One evening, as they sat together in his penthouse, the silence between them was different. It wasn't awkward or forced, but rather comfortable, an unspoken understanding between them. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "Olivia, I know this whole situation has been unconventional. I know we made a deal, and I didn't expect it to turn into this. But I can't help the way I feel." Olivia looked at him, her heart racing. She had been trying to push her feelings aside, telling herself that this was just a temporary arrangement, that it would all end in a year. But seeing the sincerity in Ethan's eyes made her question everything she thought she knew about their relationship. "Ethan," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never imagined this would happen. I came into this with a plan, just to do my part, get the money, and move on. But, you've changed everything. I didn't expect to feel this way." There it was, the confession she had been avoiding. She didn't know what was happening between them, but she couldn't deny it any longer. The connection was real. Her feelings for Ethan were real. They sat there for a moment, neither knowing exactly what to say next. It was one of those rare moments when words didn't seem to matter. The silence spoke volumes. Ethan reached over and took Olivia's hand in his grip gentle but firm. "I don't know what's going to happen between us, Olivia," he said softly. "But I do know one thing. I don't want to let you go." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard Ethan speak like this before. The strong, confident CEO who had always been in control was now showing his vulnerability, and it was something that made her feel closer to him than ever before. She squeezed his hand, her voice steady as she replied, "Neither do I." But even as they shared this moment, there was still a part of them both that questioned whether they could make this work outside of the context of their contract. Would they still feel the same when the deal was over? Would the pressures of their different worlds push them apart? The uncertainty hung in the air, but in that moment, they both realized that they couldn't ignore what was happening between them. The fake marriage, which had started as a simple contract, had evolved into something real, and they both knew it. As the weeks passed, they continued to navigate this new dynamic between them. The boundaries of their arrangement were beginning to blur, and neither of them was sure how to proceed. But despite the uncertainty, they both felt something undeniable, a growing connection that went beyond business, beyond the deal. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, about vulnerability, and about the possibility of something more. They were no longer just two people pretending to be married, they were becoming something else entirely. The question was, could they make it last? Time would tell. But one thing was certain, their fake marriage had turned into something real, and neither of them was ready to walk away. Weeks went by, and the tension between Ethan and Olivia only grew stronger. What had started as a simple business arrangement, a contract that neither of them had expected to become emotional, had evolved into something deeper. They had spent so much time together since the earthquake, and in that time, they both discovered parts of each other that were not just intriguing but impossible to ignore. Ethan, the billionaire entrepreneur, who had always been focused on his empire and business, was now increasingly captivated by Olivia's strength and independence. She wasn't just a pretty face in his world anymore, she had become someone he could depend on, someone he wanted in his life, even beyond the contract they had signed. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself questioning everything he had believed about relationships, about love, and about what he truly wanted. Olivia, on the other hand, was equally conflicted. She had come into this arrangement thinking it was temporary, a way to help her career while playing the role of a supportive wife. But Ethan had surprised her in ways she didn't expect. She had always admired his intelligence, his ambition, his success, but now, it was his vulnerability that caught her off guard. The man who had once been nothing more than a powerful CEO was now someone who could make her heart race, someone she felt connected to on a level she didn't want to let go of. Still, Olivia couldn't fully trust what she was feeling. Could she really allow herself to fall for him? Or was she simply being swept away by the intensity of their situation? She had always guarded her heart, and this new development made her question everything. One afternoon, as the city began to fully recover from the earthquake, Ethan invited Olivia to an exclusive gala. It was an event he had been planning for months, a chance to celebrate his company's recovery and the success of his latest project. But for Olivia, this night felt different. It wasn't just another event. It felt like a turning point, a moment that would define the future of their relationship. As they arrived at the venue together, Olivia noticed the way people looked at them, eyes filled with curiosity, whispers behind hands. They were no longer just colleagues or business partners, they were a couple. At least, that's how it appeared to everyone else. The thought of being seen this way, of truly being Ethan's wife in the eyes of the world, stirred something deep inside Olivia. Could she keep pretending, or was it time to admit that this wasn't just an act anymore? The evening progressed, and Ethan and Olivia moved through the crowd, laughing, talking, and playing the part of a perfect married couple. But underneath the surface, both of them were struggling with their own thoughts. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how Olivia looked that evening, her beauty, her grace, the way she seemed so at ease in this world that had always been his. She was wearing a stunning red dress that hugged her curves, and as she laughed at one of his jokes, he found himself falling a little bit more in love with her. Every time she smiled at him, his heart skipped a beat. But still, there was hesitation. Was this real? Or was it just the perfect storm of emotions brought on by the pressure of their arrangement? Later in the evening, they found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, and the cool night air was refreshing. Ethan leaned against the railing, and Olivia stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Neither of them spoke for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Olivia, I've been thinking a lot about this, about us. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if what we have is just a result of the situation we're in, or if it's something deeper. But I do know that I can't pretend anymore." Olivia's heart raced at his words. She turned to him, her eyes wide, her voice soft. "I feel the same way," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I never expected this to happen. I thought I could keep things separate, business and this. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. "I don't want to let go of you, Olivia," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "Not now, not ever. I don't care about the contract anymore. I care about you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. She had always prided herself on being independent, not needing anyone to complete her. But in this moment, standing on the balcony with Ethan, she realized that she had changed. She had let her guard down, and she had allowed him to get closer to her than anyone ever had. Was she ready to admit that she wanted more than just the contract? That she wanted him, all of him, even with all the uncertainty that came with it? The silence between them was charged, heavy with unspoken words and emotions. For a long time, they simply stood there, holding hands, both trying to figure out what came next. The decision was theirs, and it wasn't going to be easy. Could they take this leap? Could they make their fake marriage into something real, or was it doomed to remain a facade? Only time would tell, but for now, the night was theirs, and the world seemed a little less uncertain. The weeks that followed were both a whirlwind and a time of reflection for both Ethan and Olivia. As the pressure of their fake marriage continued to build, so did their feelings for each other. The line between what was real and what was staged became more and more blurred, and both of them started to question whether they could truly separate the two. Ethan had always prided himself on his control, his ability to keep his emotions in check, to keep everything, especially his personal life, under tight lock and key. But with Olivia, he felt like he was losing his grip. She was different than anyone he had ever met. Her independence, her strength, her refusal to be impressed by his wealth and power were things that had drawn him to her. But now, there was more. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, one that neither of them could ignore, no matter how hard they tried. Olivia, too, found herself struggling with her feelings. What had started as a business arrangement, a way to secure her future and gain financial independence, had turned into something far more complicated. She had promised herself she wouldn't get emotionally involved. She had told herself that this was just temporary, that when the year was up, she would walk away and move on with her life. But the more she spent time with Ethan, the more she realized that she couldn't just walk away. The man she was married to, the man she was living with, was someone she had grown to care for deeply. And now, she had to face a truth she had been avoiding: she was falling in love with him. One evening, after a long day of meetings and events, Ethan invited Olivia to join him for a private dinner at his penthouse. It wasn't anything extravagant, just the two of them, sharing a quiet meal in the comfort of his home. As they sat across from each other, the atmosphere was different. There was no pretense, no roles to play. It was just them, two people who had been through so much together in such a short amount of time. They talked about everything and nothing, about the future, about their pasts, and even the uncertainty of their current situation. Ethan looked at Olivia, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read her thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Olivia," he said, his tone more serious than usual, "I know we've been pretending for a while now. I know this whole thing was supposed to be temporary. But I can't keep pretending. I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you. I care about you more than I ever thought possible." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had never expected Ethan to open up to her like this. He had always been so guarded, so controlled, but here he was, vulnerable and honest. She looked at him, her heart racing, knowing that the moment they were in was pivotal. It was the moment that would define everything going forward. After a long pause, Olivia finally found her voice. "Ethan," she said softly, "I never imagined this would happen. When I agreed to this arrangement, I thought it would be easy. I thought I could keep my emotions separate. But now I realize I can't. I care about you too." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity as they sat there, facing each other. For the first time since their marriage began, there were no boundaries, no rules. Everything felt raw, real, and incredibly real. Ethan reached across the table, taking Olivia's hand in his. His touch was gentle, but there was an intensity in it that spoke volumes. "I don't know what happens next," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that I don't want to lose you. Not now, not ever." Olivia's heart fluttered as she squeezed his hand, her mind racing with the same uncertainty. They were on the verge of something real, something that neither of them had planned for. The contract they had signed, the marriage they had faked, all of it had led them to this moment. But was it enough? Could they really turn their fake marriage into something real? Could they build a life together beyond the boundaries of the arrangement? The future was unclear, and there were still so many challenges ahead, but in that moment, neither of them cared. They were together, and that was all that mattered. As the evening drew to a close, they didn't talk about the future. They didn't talk about what would happen once their contract expired. For the first time, they simply allowed themselves to enjoy each other's company. They didn't need to plan anything or worry about the consequences. In that moment, they were just two people who had found something real in the most unexpected of places. Later, As Ethan walked Olivia to the door, he leaned in, brushing a kiss against her cheek. It was soft, lingering, and full of promise. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his voice low and reassuring. Olivia nodded, her heart racing once more. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear, she was no longer living a lie. The contract, the fake marriage, it had all turned into something much more meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. The days that followed felt different for Ethan and Olivia. There was an unspoken shift between them, a sense that their relationship had entered uncharted territory. What had once been a business deal, a fake marriage born out of necessity, had now transformed into something neither of them could deny. Ethan's feelings for Olivia had grown deeper than he ever thought possible. She was no longer just his wife in name. She was the woman he couldn't imagine his life without. Every time he saw her, whether she was laughing at one of his jokes or simply looking at him with those bright eyes, his heart skipped a beat. He had never believed in love at first sight or in the idea of soulmates, but with Olivia, everything felt different. His world had shifted on its axis, and he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was real. Olivia, too, was struggling to understand what was happening. The feelings she had developed for Ethan weren't part of the plan. When she had agreed to the contract, she had kept her heart locked away, promising herself that she would not get emotionally involved. She had no room for love in her life, especially not with someone like Ethan. He was powerful, rich, and a world away from the life she had worked so hard to build. But somewhere along the way, she had started to care for him. It wasn't just his status or his wealth, it was how he treated her, how he had been there for her when it mattered most. The night of the earthquake had marked a turning point, and now, she couldn't deny the bond that had formed between them. One afternoon, Ethan invited Olivia to a private meeting at his office. They had both been busy with the aftermath of the gala, the ongoing demands of his business, and the increasing tension in their personal lives. But today, Ethan had something important to discuss. As Olivia walked into his sleek, modern office, she noticed how different everything felt. The space was filled with the usual luxurious decor, polished wood, glass walls, and framed artwork. But there was an air of uncertainty about Ethan. She could see it in the way he was sitting at his desk, his hands steepled in front of him, his gaze focused on something only he could see. When she entered, he looked up at her, and for the first time, she noticed a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "Olivia, there's something we need to talk about," he said quietly. Olivia's heart raced. She had no idea what this conversation was going to be about, but something in his voice made her feel uneasy. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, trying to keep her tone steady. Ethan motioned for her to take a seat, and she did, her hands clasped in her lap as she waited for him to speak. He took a deep breath before he spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this whole arrangement," he said, his voice low and measured. "And I can't help but feel that things have changed. I know we made a deal, and I know that this was supposed to be temporary, but I'm not sure I can go on pretending anymore." Olivia's pulse quickened. Was he going to end it? Was he about to tell her that the deal was over? Her mind raced, but she kept her face neutral. "What do you mean, Ethan?" she asked, her voice betraying only the slightest hint of fear. Ethan looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read her thoughts. "I'm not talking about ending the deal," he said slowly, his voice softer now. What I'm talking about is the fact that I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you. I know this started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia's heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had never expected this. She had never expected Ethan to feel the same way. She had convinced herself that she was in this for the money, for the career boost, and that she could walk away when it was over. But now, hearing him confess that he had feelings for her, real feelings, made everything seem so much more complicated. I've tried to ignore it, Ethan continued, his voice raw with emotion. I've tried to convince myself that it's just because of everything that's happened, the earthquake, the pressure we've been under. But I can't ignore it anymore, Olivia. I want more than this. I want you. Not just as my wife in name, but as the woman I've come to care about. Olivia sat there in stunned silence, her mind reeling. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid of how much it would hurt if they admitted their feelings for each other. She had spent so long protecting herself, refusing to let anyone in. But now, with Ethan's confession hanging in the air, she felt as though she had no choice but to face the truth. She had fallen for him too. She had fallen for the man she had once seen as nothing more than a business partner. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Olivia spoke. Ethan, I care about you too, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I never expected this to happen. But I can't deny it anymore. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. The moment was heavy, charged with the weight of everything they had just confessed. Ethan reached across the desk and took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Olivia looked at him, her heart in her throat. I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. But whatever happens, we face it together. In that moment, they both realized that there was no turning back. The contract was no longer just a piece of paper. It had turned into something much deeper, something they both had to confront. Whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together, no matter the cost. After that conversation, things between Ethan and Olivia changed, though neither of them could quite articulate why. They had both admitted their feelings for each other, but there was still a lingering uncertainty. The world around them continued to spin, his company, the constant public appearances, the fake marriage they had built their lives around. But now, all of it felt different. They were no longer just playing a role. The love they had denied for so long was real. The question was, what now? What happened when two people who had started out as strangers, bound only by a contract, suddenly realized they wanted more? The contract, once a lifeline, now felt like a constraint. The thought of it expiring in just a few months felt overwhelming. Would they be able to walk away from each other when the time came, or had they become too intertwined? One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and work, Ethan and Olivia found themselves alone in the quiet of his penthouse. They had both been avoiding the inevitable conversation, not wanting to admit how much they had changed since the night of the earthquake. But as they sat together, the weight of their feelings seemed too much to ignore any longer. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice quieter than usual. Olivia, I know we've been avoiding this conversation, but we need to talk about what happens when the contract is over. His words hung in the air, thick with the tension that neither of them had wanted to acknowledge. Olivia looked at him, her heart racing. This was the moment they had both been dreading, the moment when reality could no longer be ignored. "I know," she said, her voice steady, though her mind was in turmoil. She had never allowed herself to get this close to someone before. She had always kept her guard up, always been prepared to walk away when things got too complicated. But now, sitting next to Ethan, everything had changed. She didn't know what would happen when the contract ended, but she did know one thing: she didn't want to lose him. "Not now, not ever. Ethan," she continued, her voice softer now, "I don't know what the future holds. But I know that I can't imagine my life without you in it." Ethan's expression softened, his gaze filled with sincerity. "I feel the same way," he replied, his hand gently brushing against hers. This whole arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but somewhere along the way, it became something real. "I can't just let go of you. I don't want to." The confession hung between them, filling the space with an undeniable truth. Ethan had always prided himself on being in control of everything: his business, his career, his emotions. But with Olivia, he was no longer in control. And for the first time, he realized that was okay. They sat there in the quiet of the night, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow connected in a way neither of them had anticipated. Olivia felt her heart flutter as she squeezed his hand, her mind racing. This wasn't how she had planned things. But somehow, she had found herself in love with Ethan. In a world where she had always been independent, this was new territory for her. She had always relied on herself, but now, she wanted to rely on him. She wanted to build something real with him, something that went beyond the contract, beyond the arrangement they had created. But could they? Would they be able to navigate the complexities of their lives and build something real together? As the night wore on, the conversation shifted to more practical matters: what would happen after the contract was over, what their next steps would be. But even as they discussed the future, neither of them could deny that things had changed. They had changed. The relationship that had started as a business transaction had become something far more meaningful. And the question they both faced was whether they could take the leap, not just into the future of their business but into a future together. As they finally decided to call it a night, neither of them had the answers, but they both knew that they were ready to figure it out. They were ready to face whatever came next. Together. As the days passed, Ethan and Olivia found themselves at a crossroads. The contract they had once relied on was now just a reminder of how much they had changed. Their feelings for each other were undeniable, but the future was still uncertain. Ethan had never been one to plan too far ahead. He liked control, liked knowing where everything was headed. But now, with Olivia, things were different. He wasn't sure what the next step was, but he knew one thing for sure: he didn't want to lose her. He had spent years building his empire, focusing on success, but now, he realized that love and connection were just as important as anything else. Olivia had become the center of his world, and he couldn't imagine it without her. But could they build a future together when everything had started out as a business transaction? That was the question that lingered in his mind every day. Olivia, on the other hand, was feeling the weight of the situation more than ever. She had told herself time and time again that this was just a temporary arrangement, that she would leave when the contract ended and go back to her own life. But the more time she spent with Ethan, the harder it became to imagine walking away. She had never allowed herself to get close to anyone in this way, had always kept herself emotionally distant to protect her heart. But Ethan had cracked through those walls, and now, she found herself wanting more. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't want to walk away from him. She didn't want to go back to the life she had before, she wanted a future with him. But how could she ask for that? How could she risk everything when she wasn't sure if Ethan felt the same way? One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, the cool breeze blowing softly through the air, Olivia decided it was time. She couldn't keep pretending that she wasn't falling for him, that this wasn't more than just a contract. Ethan had made his feelings clear, and it was time for her to do the same. She turned to him, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happens when this is over. And I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I don't want this to end. I don't want to walk away from you." Ethan turned to her, his expression softening as he heard her words. He reached out, taking her hand in his touch reassuring. "Olivia," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I don't want you to walk away either. I know things started out the way they did, but this, what we have now, it's real. It's not just a contract, and I don't want to pretend that it is anymore." He paused for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts, before continuing. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want you in it. I want to figure this out, together. I'm not ready to let go of you." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comforting, filled with understanding. Olivia squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with relief. She had been so afraid to voice her feelings, afraid that if she did, it would all fall apart. But hearing Ethan's words, knowing that he wanted the same thing, made everything seem possible. She leaned in slightly, her forehead resting against his. "I'm not ready to let go either," she whispered. They sat there for a while, just holding each other's hands, the world around them fading away. The future was still uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead. But in that moment, neither of them cared about what came next. They were together, and that was all that mattered. They had started this journey as strangers, bound by a contract, but now they had something more, something real. And whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together, side by side. As the months passed, Ethan and Olivia grew even closer. Their relationship, once based on a simple contract, had transformed into something they both treasured. They had faced challenges, doubts, and uncertainty, but through it all, they had stood by each other. The fake marriage that had started as a business arrangement was now a real partnership, built on trust, love, and mutual respect. They had worked through their fears, their insecurities, and had come out stronger on the other side. Ethan had learned to let go of his need for control and had embraced the vulnerability that came with being open and honest with Olivia. Olivia had let down her guard, learning to trust someone else with her heart. Together, they had created something beautiful. They were no longer bound by a contract, but by the love they had found in each other. The day of the contract's expiration came sooner than they expected. It was the day they had both been dreading, unsure of what the future would hold. They had spent so much time wondering if they could make this work, if their feelings were real, if they could build a life together outside of the arrangement they had originally set. And now, as the final day of their agreement loomed, they were faced with a choice. They could walk away, return to their separate lives, and move on. Or, they could take the leap and commit to something even greater, something beyond the business deal that had brought them together. The decision wasn't easy, but neither of them had any doubt in their hearts. They knew they had already made their choice. On the evening of the contract's expiration, Ethan and Olivia sat together in his penthouse. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside the windows. They were no longer two strangers pretending to be married, they were two people who had fallen in love, who had found a connection neither had expected. Ethan looked at Olivia, his heart full. "I know we started this as a business deal," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But what we have now, it's not just a contract. It's real. I love you, Olivia." Olivia felt her heart swell with emotion as she looked back at him. She had never imagined that she would find someone like Ethan, that she would fall in love in a way that felt so genuine, so right. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with the truth of her words. They sat together, holding hands, their hearts beating in sync. Neither of them needed to say anything more, the words they had shared were enough. They had found each other, and in each other, they had found home. As the night drew on, they both knew that their journey was just beginning. The contract may have ended, but their love was only starting to take root, to grow stronger with each passing day. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything that came their way. Together, they had built something real, and now, they were ready to embrace whatever came next. In the end, it wasn't the contract that had brought them together, it was their willingness to take a chance, to open their hearts, and to let love grow in the most unexpected of places. What had started as a fake marriage had become the realest thing in their lives. And for Ethan and Olivia, that was all that mattered. They had found something worth fighting for, and in each other, they had found everything they had ever been looking for. The future was uncertain, but together, they were ready to face it, knowing that they had already created a love that was real.